Hello, sweet one, and welcome to the Survivor Sessions, brought to you by Star. Due to mature content, please do not play this around children. The trauma of being sexually assaulted rewired my brain, it shattered my beliefs, and it led to years of self-destruction. I deeply understand the haunting effects of being raped. I've done a tremendous amount of beautiful healing work over the years, and it's time for me to gather my courage and my vulnerability so that I can share this healing with you. You can heal, and these survivor sessions were created to not only show you that you are not alone, but to also show you the ways that we can heal, release our shame, and reclaim our power. Today's episode features Denali. Denali is an advocate at Star. In today's episode, she shares the many services Star can provide for survivors, and she also shares her personal story. This talk is full of vulnerability, practical tools, laughter, and so much value. If you're struggling, please call Star's 24-hour hotline toll-free at 800-478-8999. Now let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody. I am here for another Survivor session, and tonight I have Denali with us. And Denali is an advocate at STAR, which stands for Standing Together Against Rape, and that's a local rape crisis center here in Anchorage, Alaska. So Denali, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm loving the harvest fall vibes with the hair and the sweater and the whole thing.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak and share some of the things that I've learned and that I share with people that I interact with who are experiencing or have experienced sexual trauma in the past.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, so STAR for me, well, of course, everyone that's introduced to you guys for the most part are maybe having the worst day of their life. And I know I've come in recent years, even doing some trainings with the staff and like talking about self-care and all of that for like, what's the compassion fatigue, things like that I'm sure you go through as someone who's kind of there to help people who are in crisis all the time. Like that sounds super intense to me. And I can't actually do that. Like I've thought about working at Star or some different places like that. And I'm like, no, like my brain, it makes me really nervous. And I feel like the amount of self-care you need has got to be super duper high. Yeah, I'll tell you more about like my story with Star, but how is it as an employer, as someone who's kind of there watching people in crisis all the time? Are you okay?
I am not okay, is what I would say. I don't think anybody's okay right now, and I think that's okay. Like, we just have to kind of be more gentle with ourselves right now as professionals in this work, as people who've experienced trauma, as people who are experiencing the trauma of living through a global pandemic and making it out with, different degrees of harm to themselves and their family, whether that's mentally or physically or something else, So I think everything's just tough right now. The transition to working from home is tough because of the subject matter that we speak with our clients about, and having trauma kind of like in our personal home space. So that's been something that's been challenging to navigate for us. But we're all, happy to be there for people and happy that we're able to be creative and still come to this work and be there with people and meet them. And our clients have been so accepting and flexible with us, with how things are, and have just been really adaptive. And I like to call that to their attention and just remind them that we're adapting, we're making it through, and that's a skill, that's a skill that they have. So yeah, it's an interesting time, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy for everyone. And I'm curious, have you guys had more calls during this time?
Yes, I would say that our requests for service have gone up. During the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people who had kind of naturally disengaged from services or didn't necessarily need things reached back out to us looking for financial assistance. And I think that's been our primary like request from people, is the financial support. And we've been able to meet that need for people in most cases, or refer to a COVID specific resource if we haven't been able to meet their need. But the need is just really high, and there aren't a lot of housing resources, unfortunately. So that's something that's challenging as well.
Oh, okay. I wasn't even thinking that. I didn't really know that you guys did financial aid in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yes. So we can pay for therapy sessions potentially. That's something we've done in the past. If they have a private counselor that they are working well with, we can potentially like compensate that therapist for a certain amount of sessions. We do also have Eden, who's our counselor that can work with people, and she works with people at no cost to them. We do have a partnership with Full Spectrum Health as well, where we can help youth cover the copays for Medicaid and be seen there. So that's really wonderful. Also housing. We can help with like rent, utilities, deposits, things like that. We've helped with property damage to some extent, like car repairs in the past. We can help with relocation. So it's all case by case, and we have a case manager that reviews people's applications as they, we try to meet their financial need. But I'm grateful that we're able to help, because financial stability is huge in your overall sense of safety, and a lot of people don't have that right now.
Yeah. And I'm sure too that a lot of people make decisions that aren't in their best interest to save money, which sounds kind of strange, but I mean, if you're in a dangerous situation but you have zero money, how are you going to get yourself out, and that's stressful to think about.
Yeah, that's absolutely completely logical. And we see people that unfortunately do have to make those choices and navigate those things. Especially with winter coming, it's dangerous to be without shelter during that time. And some of our shelter resources are in lockdown to protect the participants from COVID. So it just depends on, what resources are out there for people.
Yeah. So when I originally went through my assault, which was a long time ago, and Star is way more epic now than it was then. I mean, it was amazing then, but this is like 15 plus years ago. So, I mean, the amount of services you have now has grown quite a bit, but Star made such a huge difference in my like healing. And even the day of my attack, I was like, the 911 came and all this stuff, and it was a very dramatic day, and was like sent to the hospital. It was very violent, and I remember a million things were going wrong in my head. I was in shock, I was terrified, I was confused, I was like in and out of my body, and police officers kept wanting to talk to me, and doctors and people, and there's just all these people around, and this advocate from Star showed up at the hospital, and she like stood in between me and everyone. And I loved her so much because I didn't want anyone to touch me. Like, I didn't want anyone to get near me. I was so freaked out. And she was so cool because she's like, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm not going to touch you. I'm not going to do anything you don't want me to do. But do you want all these people asking you questions right now?" And I was like, no. And she said, "Okay, I'll take care of it." And then she just stood there like this badass shield in between me and and I was like, I'm not ready for all these things. And even as like the SART nurses and people that needed to do these exams came in, she never left my side. And even though like I didn't want her to touch me, she was just there, and it was just that presence was like my first thing with Star, that person, that advocate. I don't remember her name. I don't remember what she looks like, but I remember her being there, and it was really powerful. So do you guys still do things like that? Do people go out? Do you do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I am one of the people going out. There's a few of us that are able, because of our living circumstances and family setups, we're able to take on the risk of responding with COVID happening and kind of going into that hospital setting. And I'm one of the advocates that do that. And honestly, it's like one of my favorite things, which is a strange thing to say, considering the subject matter, but just being able to be there for somebody, especially if it's somebody who I'm helping in the middle of the night or like first thing in the morning, because if I'm going on a call at like 7 a.m., for example, I know that that person has been like sitting with the police since 2 probably and has been to the hospital and has just had like kind of a long road to get there. And just being able to show up and say, hi, my name's Denali. I'm going to be your advocate. I'm going to explain what's going on here, and I'm going to be here, and I'm going to try and make sure that this happens how you would like it to and at your pace, and we're here for you. And then just really be able to connect right away and say, nothing that happened was your fault. You're not crazy. You did whatever you needed to do to keep yourself as safe as you could in that moment. And then being able to connect with that person and follow up and like see what their ongoing needs are. And then it's kind of cool, like when I get to talk to people and they transition from talking about all of the things that are not so great or not going well to calling me and being like, I'm so excited, I have a job interview, or I was able to stand up for myself against my like overbearing parents, or just like these little victories. And I try to remind people in the beginning, kind of like when we're in that like 3 weeks post incident period, that, hey, like right now we're talking about, you know, the things that you want to work through and the unfortunate things that have happened or are happening, but you don't just have to talk to me about bad stuff. I'm here to support you as a whole person. So if there's something that you're really proud of yourself about and you want to share with somebody that you know will understand and you know will support you, please call me. Like, please leave me a message. And that's the way it's working with COVID right now. We have people call our crisis line and leave their name and callback number with the advocate they're trying to reach for kind of ongoing follow-up support. And then that advocate will call them back from a blocked number, since we're at home and using our cell phones and that sort of thing. But we explain that to them too. So if they're screening their calls, they know that it's probably one of us that's calling them. But just being able to hear those little, like, even small successes, I think makes it, as a care worker, as an advocate, like it just keeps you going, and it helps you like remember that, you know, even as the papers pile up, or even as it seems like there's an unceasing need in our community and lots of people being harmed and lots of people who unfortunately need this support, that it does mean something and it does make a difference, and they do like feel seen and they feel heard and they feel like, even if nothing went the way that they needed it to go, or the system didn't work out the way they wanted it to, or they're struggling right now, there's somebody that's just there. There's an agency that's just there for them at 3 a.m, at, you know, 8 a.m, whenever somebody calls. And I so appreciate that we have our dedicated community members that go through our 40-hour training and answer our crisis line and are there to meet people at 2 a.m. who are upset and guide them through their options, or just talk, or just listen to them vent. I think that's one of the best services that we offer, honestly, is just that relief. And that service is not just for people who experience sexual trauma themselves. It is also for their friends, their family, loved ones. We know that sexual assault doesn't only impact the person who directly experienced it. That person interacts with and loves so many people, and the people who love us really struggle with how we've been harmed. And right after that incident happens, when people start to tell their parents and their partners and maybe even their children, and kind of explain, or their, you know, coworkers or supervisors, those sorts of things. Those people might say things that are well-intentioned, but end up hurting, right? They'll go through the shoulda, coulda, woulda, or how to prevent it next time, or those kinds of things. And that's not what that person needs. So I always offer, because when somebody is suffering from trauma, unfortunately, it then becomes that person's job to teach others how to care for them. But that's not really their job, and that's not really their responsibility. So I try to, with as many clients as I can, take that responsibility away from them and say, hey, your story belongs to you, and you get to choose how you share it, who you share it with, when you share it with the people in your lives. And they might not react in a way that feels supportive. And if that happens, you give them our crisis line number and you tell them to talk to me, because that's a conversation they can have with me. They don't need to have that conversation with you. You don't need to worry about consoling them or helping them feel better or justifying your reaction or lack of reaction or whatever your body did in that moment or anything. That's not for you to have that conversation with them. They can talk to me and I can say, hey, yeah, that's normal. People go through that. I understand it's very painful to have a loved one hurt, and that you're feeling so out of control and so anxious and so sad and angry and betrayed and all of these things. And you just wish that you could have protected that person then, but you can protect them now by processing this stuff with me instead of expecting that they work through it with you.
That I appreciate that. That is amazing. I wish I knew you would.
And I wish that people took me up on that more often. And that the, moms and grandmas and partners and people called. I mean, they do call, but I just wish that more people were like, oh yeah, I can talk to an agency. I can talk to like experts about this instead of talking to my loved one who was hurt. Because when I do talk to clients, I do get them saying, oh yeah, well, my mom doesn't understand, or my sister doesn't understand, or my boss doesn't understand, my coworkers don't understand. And they don't need to be able to support that person. But I just try to be like, make them call me. Not that they are able to make them. I mean, you can't make other people do things, but.
Sure. But I mean, that's so true. The kind of ripple effect that a sexual assault can have on your family and friends. And I was really taken aback by that myself. Even like my aunt she was a singer and she stopped singing for like a year. Like she was just had like this secondary trauma, and my mom, the guilt she felt for like, why wasn't she psychic? Why didn't she just know that something was wrong? Like things like that. And also like partners, significant others. I think it was always interesting, like boyfriends, how they were trying to process that information. And, and some would just kind of have no clue what to say. I don't even know what they were feeling, but they were just kind of like, whatever you need, like, I'm here. Or they'd be like, I'm gonna fuck them up. There'd be like this aggro thing that would happen. And I'm like, I think that's coming from a nice protective place, but I don't want that, and it's like,
right.
Call Denali.
Call me. I'll
I'll
give you my line that I always give people who are in that anger space and wanting to react with violence, which is that I can't personally or professionally condone the violence. Absolutely justified, absolutely understandable to feel that way and like process it. That's valid. It's valid to feel everything. People struggle with feeling anger. People struggle with still loving the person that hurt them, because it is often somebody that we do love already, right? It's somebody that we know, that we trusted to be in that close quarters with us. And that's what we see most often. So that's a different type of challenging than if it's a scenario where the person who harms you is a stranger. But the types of reactions that people have been studied really well, I guess you could say. So we have a lot of information about like the different types of things that are normal. And that's the main thing that I do. That's my main healing work, is to tell people, you are not crazy. you aren't. You are experiencing trauma symptoms. Your body was trying to protect you and is still. And the way that you're reacting is absolutely normal. I hear this a lot, and I want to tell you that it's awful to be experiencing it, but that it will stop at some point, and you can get through it, and we can help you through it. And then talk about the resources they already have, because a lot of people don't understand how resourced they are. If we think of somebody that, we as like a general Susie Q public, I guess, would see somebody without resources, right? So maybe we see somebody who is homeless and who is struggling with substance use addiction, and is living on the streets. As your average Joe, we might see that person and think that they don't have any resources, that they don't have any skills, and that that's how they came to find themselves in that position. But when I work with people that are chronically homeless, that are struggling with substance use, I find that they're very resourced. They're very resilient. They have people that they consider family, right? That they can confide in, that they protect each other. They have skills in manual labor usually. So there will be all of these skills and these other like coping avenues that we can talk about. And they can consider those. And I just frame them as skills and give that to that person. Obviously, they are an individual and they'll choose to take it or leave it, because we provide voluntary services, and I would never want to impose my view of healing on someone, or say that because you're not at this point on this graph, that means you're not healed enough, or that sort of thing. And I feel like that's kind of common, that people will shame themselves about where they're at. Or I'll hear people say immediately after being sexually assaulted, I talk to them a week later and they say, well, I need to stop smoking. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you do not need to stop smoking right now. Right now, smoking, although unhealthy, is a coping skill that works for you. And it's a time right now where you need coping skills. And it's not healthy, it is hurting you, but it's not the most harmful thing you could be doing. So why don't we build up other coping skills? Then we can start to take the smoking away. Don't just stop smoking cold turkey in one of the most acute traumas of your life.
Yeah.
So I just kind of offer those suggestions to people that, like, yes, great goal. I'm glad you're setting them. Let's reframe. Let's maybe consider this avenue instead, or consider that the smoking might be a strength right now. And, then we'll reassess later.
That's really interesting. And it makes so much sense. And it also can take away some shame that people are probably misplacing. Well, shame never has a place, but just other like feelings that are getting misplaced. And I think too, like, trauma is so complex, and our responses, I felt like for me, it was just so up and down. And I would have those days where I'm like, no, this is good. Now I know all the women I'm supposed to save. Like, I still do that, but I was doing that a week after, while I was still like on pain pills from what happened to me, and like, and just all this stuff going on. And I'm like, no, guys, I'm okay. Like, let's go rally. And then the next day it's like, I'm not going to get out of this bed. I'm scared. I'm like, it was just, and I didn't have any coping skills whatsoever. And so I did something that I now know is really common too for assault victims, which was turning to substances. Mm-hmm. And I had an eating disorder that developed and got like really bad. And I hear that both of those things are really common for abuse victims. And it's just so sad and frustrating that, we get hurt and then we take it out on ourselves. It's us or cutting, all these different things that people do. And it's like these self-destructive, it's just so sad, but there's definitely hope. Yes. And I'm 9 years sober, and I'm 9 years free of my eating disorder. Like, everything can definitely change. But I just wanted to go back a little bit too and just talk about like the value of having someone like you who is trauma informed to speak to during those crises, because crises, what's the plural of crisis?
I think it's crises, which sounds like a zodiac sign. So.
Okay, sorry, tangent. But I mean, and that was part of that, why I loved that advocate swooping in at the hospital, because I love cops. Like, cops get a bad rap here and there, but I have had, because of what I went through, they were like superheroes. You know, they really swooped in and saved the day in their way, and they stayed up 24/7 and found the bad guy, you know? And so I think of them very fondly, but when it comes to the way they speak to people who are in the midst of PTSD, you know, they're not thinking about that. And this is a generalization, I might piss someone off by saying this, but in my experience, they were very gruff because all they're thinking is, give me this information so I can go get him because I'm helping you, you know? And the doctors are like doing things in their way. I just need to medically figure this out. What is there to be gentle about? And that's why the advocate coming in, who understands trauma, understands PTSD, understands like the just need to be gentle and to normalize what the person is going through. I mean, it's huge. It's a really big deal. So, I mean, what got you into this field? What made you want to do this?
So that is kind of an interesting question. I guess my journey to advocacy started in Hawaii. I went to the University of Hawaii at Manoa. People are also probably going to be pissed off about this. Oops. But anyway, so I had always been kind of a person who had the type of personality where people would come to me and I would make myself a resource for other people, which as an adult I've learned is bad boundaries. To like say I will be available to all of my friends to be in crisis 24/7 is like maybe not the best way to personally as an individual live your life. With work, I have training and I get a schedule and I get to, you know, say if I am under-resourced or, you know, today I had my eyes dilated. I went to the eye doctor. So I got to say, there's another advocate that can address this crisis. There's another advocate that can be there for this person. It is not just me and my 10 friends in crisis, right? So as an adult, I get to say, I can't address that right now. Somebody else can take care of that. But being, you know, 18 and wanting to save the whole world, or 19 I maybe was, in college on my own for the first time, making all kinds of friends with all kinds of different ladies and, you know, banding together. I ended up having a roommate who was younger than me and we wanted to throw a party because it was summer and whatever. And there was a guy that was there who was trying to hook up with her or something and she was not into it. And he ended up, and she was my roommate, she lived with me. He ended up trying to drug her. And I intervened and then I was sexually assaulted instead. So then I reported that and it was awful. It was not handled well. I think I had to tell my story 8 times. I'm including telling my mom and telling the campus officers and telling the crisis worker and telling the lawyer and telling all of it, right? And telling the dean and telling whoever. And then I had put it in an email and make an addendum to clarify some things, right? It was very much like Unbelievable, which I don't know if you've watched. I don't recommend it. It's very upsetting. So not a recommendation. But it was very much like that story. If you've seen the Netflix special, where you tell it, and then after you've gone through it and told it to several people, then you have to write it down. So you have to have the executive functioning of, you know, okay, I told it chronologically and now I have to write it down chronologically, which is just using a totally different part of your brain. So I experienced that. And as part of that experience, I was connected with the Women's Center on my campus, and I had been offered a TA-ship in women's studies, which is one of the departments I have a bachelor's degree from at the University of Hawaii. And I met the most amazing woman who is an attorney, a family law attorney, and she did the domestic violence family law clinic. And she was speaking about Title IX during my TA training, which is how I met her. And I started volunteering for her and like role playing in the DV family law clinic and teaching young lawyers how to be trauma informed with survivors of domestic violence. And so she really opened my eyes. And then I wanted to stay in Hawaii and work at the domestic violence center there after I graduated, but it was not in the cards financially to stay in Honolulu. It's very expensive. So I ended up coming home, and I think I graduated in December. In January, I signed up for crisis line training, and I took, 1,500 hours of crisis line training or crisis line shifts my first year, I think. And then I became an on-call advocate, and then I was an educator for a little bit, and now I'm back to advocacy. So it just kind of my own experiences and wanting to make my experience just a little bit better for the next person is really what led me to this work. And I think that that is common. It's stigmatized, I will tell you. Being a professional who has lived experience is hard.
Wait. Why?
I don't actually know the answer to that, but I have heard from other people who are survivors that there is this idea of healed enough, right? And we do need to be in a place where we can be helping and not harming others. Like, that's absolutely valid. But there's not necessarily a timeline on that. And I think for liability reasons, various agencies do have to put a timeline on it and kind of check in with people and make sure that they're okay to be in this heavy work and talking with people. And so it's protective in lots of ways, but
that makes sense. And I think because that's something that's come up a lot for me, and I've even talked with Star before about maybe holding a workshop or something for survivors who want to share their story, to talk about how to do that, when to do that, all the difficulty that can come from that. Because I've always known it was part of my mission to be a voice for survivors, partly because in my situation, I didn't know the abuser, which I think is actually kind of rare. Usually it's, someone you know. It was someone I knew, but I didn't know that at the time because they wore a mask and all kinds of scary stuff. But because of that, I didn't have the guilt or shame connection that can happen a lot when people are on a date, or this is my boyfriend, or was this my fault, and all of those things that of course are not true. It's not your fault ever. But because I had a little distance from those feelings, I thought okay, then it's my job to be a voice for this. But along the way, I learned a lot of things the hard way, and said things at the wrong time, and tried a lot to help before I was ready and before I was healed. And I think the first time I did survivor speaking for Star, oh my God, it was one of the worst days ever. I wasn't very far from my PTSD, and I went and I showed up and I was like, okay, I'm doing a good thing for the world. And I walk in and there were hundreds of soldiers in uniform. And I was supposed to get on stage and tell them.
I remember that.
It was
I remember that.
bad. And I did it and my whole body was shaking. And, and I've been doing theater my whole life and performing. And so I thought, okay, that gave me courage. I can be on a stage, no big deal.
Your knees are supposed to stop working when you're on stage.
Oh my God. It was nothing like that. I was just like, and I did it the first time and it was horrible. And then I was supposed to do it 3 times that day. And after the first time, I'm like, I'm going to go home now. And I did, and I went home and I got drunk, and, you know, and it was the same, like, I tried to do the crisis line, felt really good. I did the volunteer hours, I mean, of like the learning, got on the phone, and here I was getting super triggered, a bottle of wine in this hand, someone on the phone who like needed support. And I mean, I was there, I was listening, but I was also getting flashbacks, you know, so I was like, oh, okay, I tried that, that's not working. So, you know, even today, like, I'm on the board for Victims for Justice, which was another organization that helped me a lot through that. And that feels amazing, because I'm not working in the office having the day-to-day crisis that could be triggering, but I'm still serving in a way where I can show up and I can say, how's your budget and how can I help, and let's do a fundraiser, and, you know, get updates without it being harmful to me. So I think, you know, that's a really big thing that makes sense to me, as far as like, you don't want to be re-traumatizing someone who, while they're trying to help someone who's going through things. But
Yeah.
On the flip
and
side,
I will.
I just went one more thing is I just think it is super important and helpful, though, to have someone who understands where you're coming from, and not just because they read about it in an educational textbook. So I think there's a lot of value in that as well. So
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that many of us come to this work because of our own experiences, whether they were direct or we know somebody who experienced sexual trauma. And I kind of want to normalize that, because it is seen as unprofessional to speak about your own experiences. It's not written down anywhere necessarily that it's unprofessional to do that. But you never want to take the focus off of the person that you're helping and put it onto yourself. So I'm really discerning about when I share that I'm also a survivor. I think that if I have built up a rapport with a client and it seems like knowing that will be something that's helpful to them, because again, they'll know that I understand. They'll know that I've walked in those shame boots that they're in right now, and like been through the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome and the self-blame and all of those things. So it's very infrequent that I share, but I think that I will tell people that generally a lot of us come to this work as survivors, and we start out wanting to help other people. And you just have to be really honest with yourself, I think. I am a person who is learning to be more honest with myself about what I'm able to take on and what I'm able to handle. And when I meet other people that are like me, I become the tiniest bit stern with them and say, you know, I want to encourage you to help other people. I want to encourage you to use your gifts and use your voice and provide healing for other people. And I think that that can be healing for you in some ways. But right now, you know, you need to be your focus, and we need to focus on you and where you're at in your healing journey. If there are other people that you can help by speaking with them and saying, you know what it feels like to be with them, that's wonderful. But I'd caution you from doing more than from trying to conquer the world, I guess, from trying to save the world, the whole world all at once, right? You're just one person. So maybe start with the small things, and then we can check in about those, because I totally wanted to save the whole world, and then learned how to manage those things and manage flashbacks. I mean, I've been doing trauma work for about 5 years now, and I still have cases that are deeply upsetting to me, that are very triggering, that, you know, might put me into that flashback place. But I know that I have my administrative team that I can call 24/7 and say, I'm having a bad time, or I just had this call that was very upsetting. And I know that they'll be there for me and they'll understand, and they're not going to shame me or tell me that I'm a bad advocate for being triggered, or having this emotional trauma response, which we all have. It is very normal. And I'm a person who, you know, experiences the trauma of others secondhand 40 hours a week. So that's a lot for one person to take on. And I'm not taking it on by myself. I know that I can always talk to a coworker, and that, you know, I can always be honest and say, hey, like I was saying earlier, like, hey, I just had a very emotionally challenging phone call. Will you take this? And they'll say, yes, absolutely. That's what I'm here for. Like, you can't help people if you're not helping yourself and giving yourself space. And as much as I love giving that space to other people, I'm working really hard to recognize that, especially in pandemic, I need to be giving that space to myself as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I'm glad that the cases you're dealing with are upsetting to you. If they weren't, you would be a sociopath. So I think it's like important for you to be feeling some of that, but of course not taking all of it on. And
Right.
And just going back to a survivor working with a survivor, I totally get, I mean, I've known you for quite a while now and I had no idea. I know you're extremely professional. And so I'm not surprised that you use great discernment and not share that very often, because there's probably not always a place for that. But I will say through addiction, which again is a different thing, but when I started going to 12-step meetings, which is no longer really a big part of my recovery, but for a while it really was. And I can tell you that like the recovery counselor I had at rehab, who has never dealt with addiction, but read about it a lot, her trying to help me versus a woman who had been sober for 20 years and had done all kinds of crazy stuff before. Nothing I said surprised her. Everything I felt, she's felt before. Those two, it doesn't even compare. This lady pissed me off. This lady helped me deeply, tremendously. She's still a friend of mine, you know, so I do think there is quite a bit of value to that. As long as you've taken that time to heal, which again can be a different length of time for different people depending on how willing they are to put in the work to heal. But anyway.
Definitely. And just because you hear something or see something, whether it's a piece of media or a conversation you're having with a friend or family member, or somebody else tells you about their experience, just because you encounter that thing and it creates this emotional trauma response within you, that doesn't mean that you haven't healed or you're back in square one, or, you know, none of the healing you did mattered. I think that people really are very hard on themselves when that happens, when they get flashbacks and when they're struggling with things. But the thing is, anniversaries are hard, and they might be anniversaries you don't even in your brain logically remember, and you're just having a hard time. It's very much similar to when you've lost a loved one, like when they've died, right? It is a grieving process. You're grieving the person that you were before you experienced trauma, and all of your priorities and hopes and dreams and these things. Those can still exist. They'll just need to exist differently, right? Because you have this trauma that you're navigating, and that's okay. It's okay to grieve that. It's okay to grieve all of those things. There's space for that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing that you did to be in this place. And so I just try to help people through that and allow them the space to grieve and say, it is awful, it sucks, and there's, you know, nothing that will take that part away, or like take the grief that you need to have about it, that you need to process about it away. But I'm here to tell you that there is hope, and, you know, there are these things that we can do. And if, you know, going to law school is a goal that you have, well, what are the steps that you would need to take between now and stepping through the door of law school to get there? And how can you make those steps while navigating flashbacks, while navigating, you know, med management, while navigating unsupportive family, all of those different things, the financial needs and whatever. So I can talk with people about those things that are not necessarily related, right, to the trauma, but are, because they're a whole person. So they're going to be experiencing and navigating the trauma through the lens of their future, and maybe thinking that it never ends, which, I mean, I don't know that like having experienced trauma ever goes away. But I really like and appreciate this metaphor that I saw in a somatic therapy workbook that I have. that had almost, if you picture hat boxes or like soup cans that are empty, and then there's just a little circle in the center that says trauma, and the soup can or hat box is you. It's not a glamorous metaphor, sorry, but we're all hat boxes, I guess. I don't know. But so, you know, you are the vessel, and then there's some trauma inside. And a lot of people think that doing nothing to address the trauma throughout time will mean that the trauma gets smaller, when in reality, the trauma stays the same size. But you, the vessel, the hat box, and your ability to cope with the trauma can grow and can expand. So although what has happened will never be less impactful necessarily, the way that you cope with it will mean that it has less of an impact on you in your day-to-day. And so the more skills we can build with people, the more they really see that being true. And when people feel like they've come full circle and like, now I'm back to square one, I really like to tell them, but you're not. You are maybe in a similar situation to something you experienced in the past, but now you have this coping skill, right? You have 4 square breathing, you have EFT tapping, you know, you follow a bunch of counseling Instagrams like I do. You know, it's like you have doodling techniques, you have like somatic calming techniques, you have all of these skills now. So although it feels the same, it is different. And I think just being able to point out the cycles to people and point out that, hey, we live in a society that teaches us, particularly women or people who are viewed as women, whether they actually identify as women or not, we are taught that we are responsible for everything that happens to us, right? And I do believe that men and people who are perceived as men are internalize it in a different way. So when something catastrophic and traumatic happens, we immediately go, what did I do wrong? Why is it my fault? How can I make it different? And that everyone is taught that, right? So that's where those feelings of shame come from, is that we're taught to take responsibility for the harm that other people cause us. And it's not our responsibility, right? Our responsibility is our own healing and our own well-being. Our responsibility is not the actions of someone else. And people really do shame themselves when they're using substances around the time of the assault. So I'll often share with them, well, okay, so what if this had happened in the grocery store? Like, what if you had gone to one of the 24-hour grocery stores in the middle of the night and you needed pears and you were in the produce section and it had happened there? Would you shame yourself for not calling over the security guard and having that person like walk you around the whole store while you shopped? No, you were just living your life. You were having an average night. You were doing what you always do or what you wanted to do, right? You were living the best life that you knew how at the time. And somebody else chose this for you. And unfortunately, it's something that you've now got to navigate, but I'm here with you and it's not your fault. And I just say that over and over until somebody believes me, right? Yeah. And I just remind people over and over and tell them to call me when they need a reminder, because those voices in our head, you know, sometimes they're really quiet and easy to deal with. And we're like, yeah, no, that's a lie, right? But sometimes they get louder. And sometimes people just need a reminder because you logically know it's not your fault, but emotionally, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, what we emotionally feel does not work together with our logic. It just doesn't. And right. The most intellectual people I know honestly get the most frustrated from their emotions because they're like, you know, I have those moments where I'm like witnessing what's going on and I'm like, I get really frustrated. Why am I not over this? Why is this emotion even here? And it's just, you know,
right. Hard. Or it could have been so much worse. Why am I upset about it? It's like, well, you're upset because it's upsetting and you're allowed to be upset.
Like, just why am I not over it? I need to be over it. It's been however long, you know, and it's like, well, there's no timeline on any of these things. So,
but also, what does over it mean? Like, what does that mean? Because it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
Right? Like, over it might be, I don't have those PTSD flashbacks anymore. Over it might be, I'm able to go to the grocery store without being upset, right? Over it is, I got a new job. Over it can be, I wrote poetry. Over it can be, I've been really good about having a journal and keeping a journal and paying attention to my feelings. Over it can be, I took a shower every day this week. I brushed my hair every day this week, right? So healing looks different for everybody, and you got to start small, right? It's so big, and it's something you've never conceived of, or something you've unfortunately experienced before. Like, that distinction doesn't necessarily make it easier or harder, I would say. But when it's just so big, you've got to start small, and you've got to start with you.
So all of these services you mentioned that you do, and things that start as, are these all free for people?
Yep. Yes. So all of our services are come at no cost to the person that we're helping. And, you know, sometimes there'll be like co-pays or things with therapy if they're seeing a private therapist, but usually we cover those. All of our services are also confidential, which I think is really great for a number of people in a number of situations, but particularly if there is like a teenager, for example, who has come to seek services with a parent. That teenager can have their own advocate separate from the parent, and then they can have those conversations with an advocate. Now, if they tell us that they're being harmed, like something different from the initial incident, then that would be reportable, and we'd have to report it to law enforcement and OCS. And we let them know that. We're very clear. But if they're struggling with social support with their friends, if they're struggling with substance use, or if they're struggling with like their emotional intimacy, like being hugged, holding hands, those kinds of things, if all of that is different for them and they feel embarrassed or not comfortable speaking with their parent about it, then that's something that they can talk to an advocate about. And we can say, hey, that's really normal, and here are some suggestions for ways to like renormalize that kind of platonic, like emotional intimacy, if that's something that you're really interested in. But take your time. It's okay. We don't need to be touched right now. We don't need to be hugging you. It's not required. Nobody has to touch you, not necessarily ever again, because, you know, people have to go to the dentist and whatever, but you know, but it's like, you get to really control that. And it's just such a loss of control when somebody experiences sexual trauma. So I try to tell people to do something today, especially if it's happened that day or happened recently. It's like, will you do me a favor? Will you do something today, and one little thing every day that makes you happy, that makes you feel like you? Just that little thing. And just keep trying to do those little things, because that's what really matters, is taking your power back a quarter inch by quarter inch, like however slow you need to. And I'm constantly on the internet, on Pinterest, on Instagram, trying to find things that I can share with people that will help them reclaim those little spaces for themselves, and really like occupy the space they need to, and they want to, and they deserve to, as a beautiful individual human being.
That is beautiful, and I just really appreciate you sharing all of this today. And I'll make sure that everyone has all the links to STAR, and you know, and you can share with me too if there's any other resources that I can
I have a list.
Perfect. The most information I've ever given. And that's good, because I think this is one of the most most important and meaningful and needed kinds of conversations to have. And also being here in Alaska, I know we have the highest rates of all the bad things. And so I'm just over that feeling of like, don't talk about it, it'll make someone uncomfortable. It's like, is it going to make them as uncomfortable as these things happening all around them as they already are? You know, it's like, I'm not here to make people comfortable. I'm here to help the people that need help and are seeking that. Like, that's way more important than, yeah.
Right.
So
I will stand up for somebody who's, been through hell and back in a second over your comfort. Like, I just will.
Yeah.
Like, that's where we're at. And I'm very grateful that the law enforcement that we work with and that the nurses that we work with do consider trauma and do really think about how they're speaking to people and how their questions might come off. And they might even give like a disclaimer and say, there are some questions that I have to ask that might sound like I'm, blaming you or judging you, but I'm not. I'm required to ask them. And I'll give you a heads up before I start asking those questions. And that's like such a small thing, but so important. Or I will like sit down, and after I've introduced myself, I just describe, okay, so you're going to do the med history with the nurse. We're going to do the interview. This is the number of questions that it is. This is probably how long it's going to take. Like, there's a specific section that might seem confusing or make you upsetting. Here's the content of those questions. And then we'll take a break. Then there'll be the exam. If you need to take a walk, if you need to smoke, if you need to whatever, we can do this on your time. And I think that helps people a lot, because you are so much more resourced and prepared to handle something if you have some kind of idea of what it's going to be. And when your expectations are wildly different from what's happening, it makes it bigger and scarier. So if I can explain it, then I'm gonna. And if it takes me 2 hours to explain it, I'm still gonna, because it's important that the person understands. And,
yeah,
they can ask me 9 million questions. And if I know the answers, I'll give them to them. If I don't, I'll find out.
right. Well, and also, side note, I mean, the police officer and exam and all that, that's a part of my story. That's a part of some people's story, but that's definitely not a part of everyone's story. And a lot of people are never going to talk to the police, nor do I think that they need to, or I'm sure you guys don't even push that in any way. So just to put that out there as well, because I don't want to scare anyone off, because I think one of the most valuable things that you offer is the 24-hour crisis line, where someone can just call. And I used to do that once in a while. I'd call and just say, like, I'm feeling scared. It's 1:00 in the morning. I'm by myself. I don't even really have anything much to talk about, but can you like sit on the phone with me for like 10 minutes? And they would. I mean, it can be as simple as that, but that was like huge for me, because I didn't want to upset my family. I didn't want to freak anybody out, but I knew that you guys were equipped to handle that, So I think that's just so valuable.
And I call the crisis line. I mean, I call it as a part of my job now, but when I was working and volunteering other places, while I was a crisis line volunteer, I would call the crisis line. And I would, especially when I was doing domestic violence work and working on the crisis line, I was like, I just had a really hard shift, and it was really hard. And I just need to talk about how hard it was. Like, I didn't drink any water and I didn't pee once. And it was just very go, go, go the whole time. And I'm feeling burnt out. And the volunteers would just listen to me. And I did always tell professionals when I was an educator that our crisis line is for you. It's for everybody. Whether you're a doctor or a nurse or a police officer, or you work for the National Park Service, or you're a teacher, or whoever, anybody can call our crisis line. And it doesn't matter if you experience the sexual harm, sexual trauma directly, or somebody who experienced it, or somebody told you about it, or you saw something on television, like I was saying. It doesn't matter when either, right? So there's no time limit on our services. We will talk to people and we will assist people who had something happen 30 years ago and just need support right now, right? They're just needing emotional support. They're just needing to work on some things, and we're there. And I also don't need to know either. So people don't need to rehash their trauma to me in order for me to help. Like, the only thing that I need to know that's like a qualifier for some of the financial assistance is like timeline, like when did it happen? Right.
But
like
I'm
what
sure
year or something.
Even for just a general call, someone doesn't even need to tell you their name. You're not going to be like, first and last name, who are you,
What is your social security number, and please describe your trauma in detail? No, it is not like that.
Yeah. So Yeah, I think it's amazing. So I'll make sure that everyone has the number to the crisis line, and all of the things. And so I just thank you so much. I really, really appreciate this. And I think having this information is going to really empower people to know that there's so much more healing out there.
This is my battle cry. Oh, it's do or die.
If you are a survivor or a loved one of a survivor and you are struggling, please call STAR's free 24-hour hotline at 800-478-8999. You are worthy of healing.